Hello and welcome to the Microlise podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Summers. I'm the head of global marketing for Microlise. Today I'm joined by Mark Cartwright of National Highways. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Matt.
I just wanted to provide some time for you to introduce yourself, your role at National Highways, as well as then your overall experience within the industry.
Okay, Matt, thanks. Mark Cartwright, I'm the head of commercial vehicle incident prevention at National Highways, which is pretty much what it says on the can. I'm also the lead for our Drive for Better Business programme. I've been around the industry, God, I was trying to work the numbers out when you said that, probably best part of 37, 38 years. Wow. Difficult to believe in my youthful good looks, but been around the block a few times. So hopefully that adds to the role I have at National Highways, where I've been for about 5 years now.
Wow. And, you've just taken part in the webinar roundtable with the rest of the guests. What were some of those key takeaways for you, be it, news to you or something that just reiterates some of the things that you've been thinking?
I think the biggest thing that I took from it, and it's a very comforting thought, is actually, although we're coming at things from different angles and have different viewpoints across the people around the table, we all have the same aim, which is, reducing not just the number of incidents on our roads, but also the severity and the outcomes of those incidents. So we're not actually that far away from each other in the way that we're looking at stuff.
And from your experience, what are the main human factors driving commercial vehicle incidents that you've seen out and in the field?
It's interesting that. One of the things that we talk about an awful lot is the data tells us that it's not the vehicles that are crashing, it's the people who are crashing who just happen to be in a vehicle at the time. And that's pretty much against, the vast majority of incidents we pick up in the HGV world, in the van world, and even in the car world. What then, when you start digging into it a little bit more, we talk about what we call the 5 known unknowns, which are fatigue, impairment, distraction, medical conditions, and carelessness, really, which is where we haven't managed to nail it down to one of the other 4 topics in there. And the reason we call them the known unknowns is we know they're in the mix. It's just incredibly difficult to work out what the proportionality is, what the size is. And we tend to present it as a Venn diagram with these being different circles, because we're not quite sure how big the circles are, and we're not quite sure what the interactions are between the circles. But almost without exception, you can nail it down to one or a combination.
And how do you, as part of that kind of Venn diagram of behaviours, how does distracted driving come into that? And when we look at distracted driving within the industry, there's a real big focus on it. Statistics like 80% of RTAs are caused by distracted driving. What kind of things have you seen in your experience, and any kind of practical takeaways for operators to bring into their own space to reduce it?
It's such a difficult one, to be honest, but it's achievable. And one of the things that we talk about very much is that at work driver, we industry ought to be able to influence their behaviours, because, to be blunt, they might be out on the road, but they're still at work. And you wouldn't necessarily, allow somebody to be sitting at their desk tapping away on their phone, or in a meeting catching up on their Facebook and all the rest of it. So why is it any different out on the road? So the number one step for an organisation is to make sure you've got very, very clear policies. Nobody is in any doubt about the expectations of that organisation in relation to not just distraction, but other driver behaviours as well. Yeah. And that applies across the piece. A number of fleets I've been involved with where, to be honest, the drivers ended up on the end of a disciplinary for being caught on the phone, but actually it was a boss that was ringing them. So there's a whole piece that ties into this about actually recognising that driving is, for most of us, the most dangerous thing that we do, and being distracted while you're driving, to be blunt, is just stupid. Why would you take your mind off an important task? There's lots of other elements in there. I think the manufacturers of vehicles have a role to play. Vehicles now are almost designed to distract you with access to flat screens to program and phones and social media feeds and all the rest of it. There needs to be this recognition that driving is dangerous, and let's take away those opportunities to distract. But for me, for a company, it's about getting the right policies in place and that right environment so people know what's expected.
And do you think, for adding on top of policies around technology to be brought into operations, and you've talked about, technologies technically from an OEM point of view, in-cab technology is distracting. Yeah. It's another thing to be distracted by and then penalised by your transport manager for. What role do you think technology should take within operators to avoid distracted driving, but also enforce safer driving whilst out on the road?
I think technology's got a massive role to play. I'm a big fan of driver behavioural telematics. I'm a big fan of inward-facing cameras and all the technology that goes with that. The obvious caveat is it shouldn't in its own right be adding to the distractions of the drivers. But, you're at work. your employer has a responsibility for your well-being, your safety, and the safety of those around you. And if that is assisted by having the right technology in place used properly, absolutely all for it.
And when you're looking across the fleets and the operators you've worked with over the number of years, what's your advice to operators to embed risk management and that safety culture across their fleet and within the business, not just with drivers?
One of the things I've found frustrating and terrifying in probably equal amounts over my years around the business, around the industry, is the number of businesses who actually have very robust risk management processes and policies and strong leadership around that within their organisation. Yet somehow they seem to forget the guys who are out on the road who are probably exposed to the biggest risk within their organisation. I'll share this as anecdotally. I spent some time working with a trade body in the parcel delivery world, and they, went to one of their meetings, and I spent a lot of time talking about how people had fallen downstairs in their offices and burnt their fingers on cups of coffee, which were a bit too hot coming out the vending machine, and finding new and inventive ways of cutting off bits of their anatomy in sorting hubs. Right. Not once during the meeting did anybody talk about the thousands of vehicles that they have on the road and the thousands of incidents that they have as a point of that. And actually, it was a real wake-up call to them when they actually realised they've got this massive area of exposure round the corner and out of sight that their health and safety people weren't engaging with. And my experience to date has been when those experienced health and safety professionals or leaders get to grips with that, my God, they go through it like a dose of salt because they know how to manage health and safety. They just weren't managing it over here in this area of their business.
So do you think that kind of, I made a comment to Richard Turfitt about, it's so much more visible in the warehouse and within your office, what health and safety risks there are, whilst on the road, you're disconnect from the reality of you've got a member of staff out in a vehicle, with the number of variables out on the road, being endless. Yeah. And would you say then there's kind of an increase in focus, and there requires to be the same level of focus as there is in the workplace as there is out on the road?
I think it does, absolutely. There are all kinds of behaviours which we, at the very least, turn a blind eye to, if not actually encourage a little bit out on the road, which we just wouldn't accept in a within the walls workplace. We had this idea a while ago, and we haven't quite had the nerve to do it yet, but we've got a long shot of a corridor, and we've got a national class sprinter suddenly walks up at the end of the corridor, sets their blocks down and comes down the corridor at 30 mile an hour. You wouldn't allow that in any way, shape or form. But we turn a blind eye to the fact that our van drivers, our truck drivers, our car drivers are out there speeding because, there's too much trouble to deal with it, or it helps us meet our schedule. Same with phones, same with fatigue. Fatigue is an interesting one. I'm very proud of this, actually. It was a call we had from a guy who runs a fairly small van fleet at a housing association, and he rang me up after coming to an event that I was speaking at and said, look, took it on board. The penny dropped me the other day. I was being asked to donate to a collection for one of my drivers who just had a couple of twins, happy event and all the rest of it. And it dawned on me, he's not going to get much sleep. So I called him in and said, just saying, I would rather you came to me and let me know that you were being challenged and you were having issues with sleep and fatigue and all the rest of it, and I'll try and cut you a bit of slack where I can. But I'd rather you came and talk to me rather than me finding out by having to come and unwrap you from around a lamppost somewhere. And do you think one of the other topics that kind of driver well-being, behaviour, the understanding of your driver workforce and the impact of a distracted, be it, or their minds elsewhere, I'm talking about actual phone or smoking or a seatbelt undone, distracted driving. What kind of role and lack of focus do you think the industry currently has around driver well-being and the impact that then adversely has? There's a few things in there. I think there's the round the corner out of sight piece. There's the, oh my God, it's a bit difficult piece. There's the, oh, I really don't want to get involved because this is a bit fluffy and nebulous piece. And one of the examples I'll give you, this is a con just to illustrate it really. You could easily imagine a fleet manager going up to a driver in their yard somewhere and saying, Matt, can you just go and check your tyres out again? They look a bit low, or you look a bit heavy, or I'm not sure your lights are working. And off you'll go and you'll do it, and you'll come back and it's yes or no, and if it's a no, you know how to fix it. Can you imagine the same fleet manager going up to a driver and saying, mate, you look absolutely knackered today, you had any sleep? doesn't happen. But that's where the risk is, and that's where it should be happening. Is this well-being, fitness to drive piece?
Just like your vehicle's, assessed as a walk-around check. Is it fit
absolutely.
to drive?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the driver fit for work?
Yeah, and just to get a quick advert in, because forgive me on this, you can edit it out later, mate, if you like it. We've just released our guide to driver roadworthiness document through our Driving for Better business site, which is absolutely FLC, but I think it's probably the first time anybody's even tried to pull a number of these issues all into the same place at the same time. So, please, if people want to, please have a look and download and let us know what you think.
And what are kind of some of those key takeaways from that document?
That it's manageable, but you need to address it. You need to have that psychologically safe environment where people are able to communicate and talk about things. But it does boil back to what I've kind of spoken about: distraction, fatigue and impairment, medical stuff. Certainly in the HGV world, that it's a demographic time bomb in terms of poor health. I probably won't get some of the stats quite right now, but a good 2/3 of HGV drivers are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. They score very highly on the propensity for mental health challenges. There are significant amounts of obesity in there. It's a very sedentary job. So it really is something that businesses ought to be aware of, and not just in that HGV world, because to be honest, a lot of van and car drivers are on a similar kind of trajectory with it. One of the stats that always... I guess it triggered our thoughts about this a while ago now, is Mercedes-Benz did a survey, must be 7, 8, 9 years ago now, where they identified a good 80% plus of van drivers admitted to limiting their fluid intake during the day for the obvious kind of reasons.
All right.
And you only need to be a couple of 3% dehydrated before it starts affecting your decision-making, your awareness, your attention, and importantly, your risk assessment processes. So there's all kinds of things in there where drivers should be encouraged to manage their well-being better, but also organisations should be taking an awful lot more interest
to support them on that
to
journey
support
as
them,
well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So some of the fantastic stats and examples you showed as part of the previous Microlise Transport Conference when you were speaking on the main stage was some of the examples from Operation Tramline. And the one thing that I took away from that was you guys capturing a driver eating a full lasagna whilst driving on the motorway. What are some of the most up-to-date versions of those examples now that you've seen?
Well, I'll give you my pretty much stock answer, mate, if you excuse me, is it's very easy to get distracted by the weird and wonderful, and we do have weird and wonderful. However, the great majority of incidents we identify are dead boring, if I can call it that, dead being the operative word there. So a good 2/3, 3/4 of the incidents we identify around mobile phone usage and distraction and around non-seatbelt wearing. Why somebody wouldn't want to strap themselves into something pretty solid is beyond me. And 1/4 of our fatalities on our network are people who weren't wearing seatbelts at the time of impact. Go figure. I will try and answer your question. Your previous quote was probably the winner a good 12, 18 months ago when we were talking. I'm fascinated by the driver of a horse box, and I have to say these were the proper racing horses had in the back, so a few pounds worth of horses in the back of it, driving with his elbows while he did a Rubik's Cube.
How far along with the Rubik's Cube was he?
I'm not particularly sure, but in all honesty, you could lock me into a room for a fortnight, I still couldn't do a Rubik's Cube. So how he thought he could do it while he was driving down the motorway is entirely beyond me.
It's ridiculous. Again, I guess you can't plan for that kind of example to come out.
No, it is difficult.
And then I guess, what one thing do you think operators could do tomorrow to improve safety and compliance?
Okay. Compliance v safety is one of the things I talked about on the webinar today. Is yes, of course, we're expecting people to be compliant. Compliant is your minimum level of operation. However, managing your safety is very different from managing your compliance. I can show you plenty of incidents involving perfectly compliant drivers in perfectly compliant vehicles who managed to go out and kill and injure people. So one of the concerns I do have is that businesses use compliance as the measure. That's a given. How are you managing your risk is a really important issue, and that's when you start getting into the behavioural stuff, the well-being stuff, having the right kind of culture and atmosphere within your organisation. The biggest single thing I'd ask businesses to do is to manage their risk on the road as well and as proficiently as they manage their risk within their premises. And if we can achieve that, we'll be a long way towards where we need to be. I'm very firmly of the view that if there was a single silver bullet that we could fire, it would be about making on-road incidents RIDDOR reportable. I think that absolutely would concentrate on the health and safety minds within organisations. And even without the legislation and everything that would be needed to do that, you know what, as a business, you can choose to investigate those incidents as well where we're or reportable. And I think that'll give massive benefits for an organisation.
And I guess then what frustrates you most about businesses in transport and logistics who are out there to manage road risk?
I think it's in the nicest sense, I think it's what we could perhaps define as the slopey shoulder response. It's somebody else's fault. It's within my supply chain. It's somebody who's working as a subby of a subby of a subby working for us. And the single biggest superpower I think most organisations have, all organisations have actually, is project your will into your supply chain and your suppliers. You wouldn't employ an organisation to come and do some construction work for you, for example, if you weren't pretty sure they know how to build whatever it was that you'd asked them to build. Why are you not so prescriptive in their ability to operate the vehicles in a safe and proper manner? And that would, for me, would be the single biggest frustration, but also the single biggest opportunity around this.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you very much, Mark.
Right, thanks, Matt.
Okay, thank you very much to the audience back at home. And again, stay tuned for upcoming Microlise podcasts across a number of different topics.